Hi, everybody. We're the Skeleton Crew, and the day has come. We've feared this ill portent from years now, over 2 years of releasing videos in this series, which is a wild thing to say. And we finally have to do it. We have to talk about Spinosaurus. I don't mean to spoil the subject of the video, but you probably did see it when you clicked on it, so it's been betrayed by the format.
Make peace with ye gods.
It's like when you're watching a movie and you think the main character died, and then you accidentally move your mouse on your computer screen and you see there's 45 minutes left in the movie.
Unless you're watching No Country for Old Men.
Right, yes, spoiler for a movie that was released before you were born. That's the statute of limitations. Do you think we have viewers who were born before 2006? I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, probably a few.
Probably.
Yeah, based on our comments, definitely.
You mean
Yeah,
after 2006? We were born before 2006, James.
I know. I'm saying our audience is children, but we also know it's not.
Okay.
Yes. But anyway, regardless of when you were born, you will hear about Spinosaurus all the same.
Dread it, run from it.
Your mother's warned you, fear the day.
Oh, there it is.
Wow, he's very green.
It's not easy.
Well, we don't know that. We have to ask him.
Good point.
So a few things before we introduce who we are. Just, brief notes. We're YouTubers. All the YouTuber things apply to us. You can like, you can comment, you can subscribe, you can support us on Patreon. You could even leave a tip on this video if you want to get really wacky. It could happen. And anything's possible. Explore all the opportunities available to you. Click all of the buttons under the video in the description.
Except for the one that looks like this.
Places. Right, don't click that one. God forbid you click that one.
And if you click the one that says subscribe, don't click that one again.
Right. Yes, and click on the bell. Just click on the bell. But anyway, I'm Dr. James Napoli. I'm a research instructor at Stony Brook University. And as such, as a person with a PhD in paleontology, I'm just going to preemptively say this. I am qualified to tell you about dinosaurs. In fact, everybody here is. We did get a comment on one of our YouTube shorts that I'm not qualified to tell you about dinosaurs, which made me laugh very much. I'm perhaps the most qualified person on YouTube to do so by number of degrees held. So just think about that. If what we say here is going to be right, is what I'm saying.
I don't have a bit. I was trying to think of something, but it's been a very long day. I've been up since 5 a.m. because I had to drive to the airport, which is nowhere near here, and back.
Goodness.
Yeah.
Who were you taking to the airport?
Jacob.
Oh.
We had to offset our time home for the holidays. Dear viewer, this video is happening in the past. Because my cat has an issue that requires medicine twice a day now, and so it was suddenly twice as expensive to hire a pet sitter. So we offset our days to try and reduce that. So I get to drive to Albany again in 2 days.
Oh, wonderful.
Not at 5 a.m. though. I picked a later flight. Anyways, this is off to a great start. My name is Amelia Zilo. I'm a PhD candidate at the American Museum of Natural History.
My name is Scott Johnston. I'm the vertebrate paleontology, fossil preparator, and technician at Harvard University's Museum of Comparative Zoology.
I'm Alex Rubenstahl, PhD candidate at Yale University. And I also don't have a bit.
And I'm Dalton Meyer, also a PhD candidate at Yale University. And together, we're the
Skeleton Crew.
All right, and we should probably get right into it because I actually have to have an early morning driving to an airport tomorrow, and so we're going to try to not have this video last 3 hours because I need to be up at about 4. So, and 4 is in 6 hours, so let's see how it goes. Oh no, Amelia disappeared, and all the rest of us changed our clothing. This can only mean one thing. It's a sponsored ad read. Yes, we're sponsored by somebody to do a segment like this in one of our videos. And that somebody are the Sternberg Science Camps, and we are so thrilled to be partnered with them right now. So for those of you who don't know about them, the Sternberg camps are a series of summer camp opportunities for high school, middle school, and elementary school students that teach people in K-12 education about paleontology, right? And there's a huge range of these different opportunities, especially at the high school level, where there are programs run by the Sternberg science camps all over the country. You'll be, when you register, you'll be housed on site at whatever university or near whatever museum is running that camp, and you'll get to work with a real paleontologist to learn real paleontological skills. And there's a huge variety in the stuff that they offer, and we'll talk about that in a second. The reason we're being sponsored by them is that their registration season is opening up. This video, by my calculations, will release on February 1st of 2025. And on February 6th, registration for the high school summer science camps will open. And so if you're a high schooler who is really interested in paleontology and thinks you might want to try to become a paleontologist, I would just recommend that you consider the Sternberg science camps, because this is a really, really cool and very special opportunity.
Yeah, these are awesome opportunities to have the chance to participate in. I myself did not participate in a Sternberg science camp, but I was a part of a similar program when I was in high school. And that program that I was in gave me some field experience. It gave me a little bit of prep experience, some collections experience, and some research experience. And there are opportunities of essentially all of those things in the Sternberg science camps. And they're great for a few reasons. Obviously, and one thing we'll talk about a bit more, is that they help you get early experience and exposure and kind of get a leg up if this is something you want to do and want to pursue. It makes you a bit more of a competitive applicant to have that experience under your belt. But also, and probably equally importantly, is if you think you're interested in this, this is a great opportunity to dip your toes in and find out if it's actually something you enjoy doing. I thought I wanted to be a paleontologist growing up, but when I had this kind of experience in high school, that's when I knew I wanted to be a paleontologist.
Sound advice, Dalton, and Grand Council. Not a lot to add, but I would say that if you are someone who is interested in paleontology, not only is it good to find out for yourself, but early experience like this is also very helpful for getting into graduate school and furthering a career in academia. Having familiarity with the tools we use as paleontologists, whether that's coding or work with any kind of 3D data like that. I'm currently sitting where I usually sit to do work that isn't digging up dinosaur bones. That's what most of my time as a paleontologist is spent doing. The dinosaur bone digging is only a small part of that time. So this is a great chance to get some early hands-on experience with it. And yeah, like Dalton said, see if it's for you. It cannot be emphasized how much early experience helps.
Yes. And one thing that I forgot to mention when we were planning what we would say in this ad read is that the secret fifth member of the skeleton crew, you may have never heard of her, but Amelia Zietlow is actually a member of our YouTube channel, and she's in all of our videos.
Amelia Zietlow?
The Amelia Zietlow.
Do we know?
Go back and check if you didn't realize that there were 5
If you don't believe me.
Yes, we did get many comments about the 4 of us early on, and we're still unsure who was being missed. But Amelia is going to be this summer one of the instructors for a Sternberg science camp. She's running, I think 2 camps, but at least one. She can probably confirm or deny in the comments here, but she'll be specifically running a camp about mosasaur anatomy, where she will walk the students through the anatomy of a new specimen that was discovered by the field camps for the Sternberg science camps, I think last summer. And so there's this new fossil that needs to be scientifically studied, analyzed, coded into a matrix, described, and Amelia will be running a camp telling you how to do that, showing you this process that we go through in our research. And so it's really cool because these camps give you opportunities to not just do like field or prep experience, that there are many programs that offer similar things. It's the only one I'm aware of that really gives you this sort of exposure to research stuff as well. And I often do say, to speak to Dalton's point, research is either something you're really going to like or really not going to like. And you do need to get some experience with it to know that. And it can be really helpful if that can come really early. If you don't like what research is like, then you know that going into college. But if you get bitten by that bug to keep making new discoveries like all of us have, then you'll know that, and it'll really help guide you in your career from then on.
Like my colleague said, this is an incredibly exciting opportunity that can help give you a leg up for a future career in paleontology. And I cannot recommend enough to go on their website, which we will link somewhere
on the screen.
Somewhere on the screen. And take a look at what opportunities excite you the most and apply.
Yes. One thing that I should mention is that if you don't think you're going to be interested this year, but you may in the future, there is a mailing list. We'll also supply the link for that. And if you join that mailing list, you'll get announcements about when registration cycles open up and all of that. Registration in 2025 will be open from Feb 6 to April 7. So you've got a good window of time to think about it and decide if this is something that's right for you. This is a group and an organization that we really believe in. We're kind of closely tied to them. Friends of ours are responsible for running this, and friends of ours are involved as instructors. One of us is involved as an instructor. And so we can definitely say that as practicing paleontologists, we think this is a really, really great program.
Yes.
And so we urge you to take a look.
Yeah. And if you decide you're interested and you wind up registering, just let them know if you heard about it from us. Let them know about that. It's just to help their kind of internal data so they know where do people learn about these camps. As scientists themselves, this is data they want to have. So keep that in mind.
Yes, please do. All right. We'll let you get back to the video. Amelia will be coming back in approximately 5 seconds. So enjoy the rest of the video about Spinosaurus. I'm sure you're very happy that we inserted an ad read into the beginning to further delay talking about that animal. Dalton, why don't you let it out?
I'll certainly do that.
Onto our circle of hell.
Only one. One at a time.
Does Spinosaurus exist on?
Ooh. Oh, well, I don't care for that. Okay. So that's Spinosaurus.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, what is there to really say about it?
It's a dinosaur.
Spine. It's a sore.
Looks sore.
It is.
And it does.
In fact, that's actually a really good segue. Amelia, what does its name mean?
Means spine lizard.
That's really.
I wonder
Yeah,
why.
no, I know. It's really, really hard today. We've not had any other dinosaurs with derivatives of that name so far.
It's wild how this design improves almost immediately upon being in the water.
Huh, that's interesting.
Weird.
Just add water and you get a better design.
And the species name is Egypticus, right?
Yep.
Which
is just from Egypt.
Straight to the point.
Real creative one, that Stromer.
Named after John Egypticus.
Yeah.
He's not beating the German allegations.
Very no nonsense.
Right. Yes, the notoriously creative and flowery language people, the Germans. Seeing a lizard with a big spine from Egypt, that's the spine lizard from Egypt. He did it.
We did it, Joe.
Yeah. Oh. There's some cool crocs from the Baharia Formation.
There are.
Oh, yeah, I wish we were talking about them instead.
Yeah, but we're not.
Which is where this animal is from.
Indeed.
Folks.
Is that what you've
Information.
depicted here, Dalton?
It is. And in fact, you might recognize it and say, I think I've seen this before. And to which I would say, no, you haven't. Because while Carcharodontosaurus is here on the map and is from the Baharia Formation, and we had an episode on it, this is not the same map because I couldn't find the save file because I don't think I saved it. So I remade it today, folks. Or actually, I remade it last night at like 3 a.m. But it's, you guessed it, a braided river.
Oh my God.
There are facies in the Baharia Formation that are a bit transgressive and a bit regressive, and so sometimes it's very near shore, sometimes it's a bit further from shore, but it's generally very wet. I depicted it on the Mediterranean map, not for like too many like specific reasons. It's a bit better than like the tropical map. I like the plants, and I think the sediment just kind of looks good, but also because there's some evidence to suggest that, as I mentioned in the Carcharodontosaurus video, that we're actually pretty proximal to some mountains that are shedding off sediment that's filling up these river basins. And And it's just that this happens to be a handy map where there's ocean and mountains. And here we are. But we've got this big delta. Think like the Nile Delta, which is oddly enough also in Egypt, unrelated to the Cretaceous Delta of the Bahariya Formation. But within these rocks are entombed the remains of such wondrous creatures as Spinosaurus and a lot of fish. A whole heck of a lot of fish. Some real big cool ones like Mawsonia, or not, I don't think I said that name right at all. The big coelacanth, you know the one. Don't worry about it.
One that's like a car.
Right.
And no, it's just Mawsonia. I was correct. I know
Yeah.
And freshwater plesiosaurs and saw skates, Onchopristis, of course, famously, which existed only to feed Spinosaurus.
In cool paleo art, yeah.
I do always kind of forget that Onchopristis is a saw skate and not like a saw shark.
Yeah. I must say, I frequently forget what that distinction means.
Because it's not actually a shark.
No, I mean, what I was saying is more that it's never really occurred to me to care about the distinction between those things, but it is pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
People probably don't think about like, I don't know, like marsupials existing. Like, it's like nobody's thinking, huh, that's weird. I don't know.
Right.
Yeah. And I think we actually know a fair bit of the paleobotany of this area too, which I have not. I have tried to depict in vibe and in vibe alone because the plants in this game are fickle and don't allow for supremely faithful reconstructions of paleo environments. But we do what we can, folks.
So Dalton, I'm sorry, tell us more about the paleo flora.
Well, I can only tell you what I've found in images. No, so there's like these weird, like kind of mangrove-y looking plants that seem to be around that I don't know if they're actually related to like modern mangroves. And upon very cursory investigation, I think maybe mangrove is more of a form definition than like a taxon. I could be wrong. I don't study plants. I find them only passively interesting, I'm sorry to say. But there are these mangrove-y looking things. And some smaller kind of conifers that would be neat to include, and some weird kind of early angiosperms. So there's like a number of plants that just you can't really get in this game, and it seems that they're kind of spatially heterogeneous, where you've got your mangroves close to the big bodies of water, and then as you get further away, it becomes more arid, and so you get slightly more arid reflective plants. But that's kind of the world we're living in, folks. It's wet and wild, which means there's plenty of food for a big guy.
That's true. Now, perhaps I should pivot us into like the elephant in the room with Spinosaurus, which is, why have you not depicted the Chem group?
A devious question.
Indeed.
Because I didn't want to. But no, it's because so Spinosaurus aegypticus has a storied history that you may or may not be familiar with, and that Scott will certainly recount for you in short order here. But to sum it up briefly, Spinosaurus aegypticus, the holotype, is from the Bahariya Formation of Egypt. And that's why I decided to depict it here, because this animal, in particular, being the Jurassic Park 3 Spinosaurus, is more or less trying to represent what we knew of that animal in 2003, which was what we knew about from Egypt, and then various bits and pieces from Morocco, but nothing tremendously substantial. There was Spinosaurus moroccensis, which doesn't exist anymore. It's just considered Spinosaurus aegypticus. But if you're familiar with the new work that's been happening on Spinosaurus since 2014, all of that material comes from the Chem group of Morocco, which is where the Neotype of Spinosaurus aegypticus comes from. So, could I have done the Chem? Certainly. Did I? No. But I also don't know that much about the Chem paleo environment, and if I had to guess, it's probably very similar. So if you'd like to imagine this as the Chem, you're probably fine to do so. I say that with an asterisk, and please don't come at me if I'm wrong. I'm just a widow guy.
He's just a little guy.
Just a little guy.
And before we get too far off of the paleo environment, we should maybe give a moment to some of the other cool critters that are coming out of this formation. We mentioned fish earlier in a part of the video that I don't remember, which is a good sign. But there are also cool things that are also technically fish, but reptiles. To confuse everyone. Some other cool things that are coming out of this formation include one of the earliest sea snakes, an Elythnophidian.
I actually didn't know that. What? Really?
Yeah, it's one of the oldest. There's the modern radiation of sea snakes, which are elapids.
Yeah.
Nenemus. But there's this other radiation, very primitive radiation of sea snakes, the Elythnophidians, which include like those. What are they called? What's the common name for them? Because they're
sea crates.
Are you thinking of the elephant trunk snake?
Yes.
Acrocortis.
Acrocortis, thank you. I thought that was part of the same. Yeah, that's a. Oh god, it's so weird looking.
I didn't think they were venomous.
Oh no. Okay, I've misremembered.
No, yeah, that's Paleophis. Not
okay.
Not
right.
Paleophis is the giant one, right?
Coming back.
Yeah.
There are at least three radiations of marine snakes. They're the extanolapids, they're the paleophids, which have a living descendant in the elephant trunk snake, which is freshwater, but
and very cool.
The fossil ones appear to be marine. And then before that, there are the densely ribbed Simoliophids.
Yes.
Which are some of the earliest marine snakes, and they're present in this formation. There's also a freshwater plesiosaur, I think.
There is, which we again did mention.
And there's some cool crocs. There are 2 or 3 species of stomatosuchids, which are cool because they have big flat snouts, and they look very
surfboard
silly.
Head ones.
And they're pretty big, they're pushing 8 meters possibly. And there are also terrestrial crocs, I think there are Sebasuchids there, and I can't remember which one in particular. Probably Haematosuchus. It's diverse. There are no ornithischians. Where are they?
Yeah, that's interesting. It's like the Triassic. They're just not showing up.
Anyway, yeah, there are cool things from there that aren't dinosaurs. But there's also Spinosaurus, which is objectively very cool.
Yes.
Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start talking about phylogeny. Now, there are many controversial aspects to this here dinosaur, Spinosaurus.
There are?
Yes, things like the guy who discovered it, what he was up to, and as well as, importantly,
did he know?
What was its ecology like? But what's not super controversial, at least relatively, is its phylogeny, which we're going to cover right now. Spinosaurus is, and get this, a spinosaurid.
Wait.
Oh.
I know.
When did this happen?
Well, recently in human history, but yeah, it's the group that it's the genus the group is named after because it's cool and weird. Now, as scientists, we didn't really have a great idea on what. So when it was originally discovered, it was kind of lumped in with general carnosaurs, because what was known of it included mostly a postcranial skeleton. So you'll see old school reconstructions. It's got a very allosaur-y tyrannosaur head. It looks like it's like if you took Acrocanthosaurus and you pulled its spines further out of its back.
It's like a
But this is
finishing
not
move.
what it was.
Jesus.
And it wouldn't be until the discovery of baryonyx and additional Spinosaur material that this idea of Spinosaurids began to take shape. And this is me taking shape of Spinosaurus in my hands. Do you see? This is
Well
me.
done.
This is my evolution. Do you see? So Spinosaurus is part of Spinosauridae, the family. But within Spinosauridae, there are 2 smaller subclades, the Baryonychines and the Spinosaurines. So Spinosaurus, unsurprisingly, is a Spinosaurian. So this means it's more closely related to things like, how do you say it? Oxalaxia?
Oxalia, I think.
Oxalia.
I've always said
a lot of vowels.
Oxalia.
Oxalia, which appears to be a close relative, as well as things like irritator and ichthyovenator, which appears to have its own kind of funky spine going on. And then you have things like the baryonychines, or like baryonyx and suchomimus, which, while they still have relatively tall neural spines, they don't have sails. Oh yes, and people will probably get upset if I don't mention Sigillosaurus, which is the Brazilian. What?
Are you thinking Sigillomastosaurus?
I don't. Sure.
Because that's not Brazilian. That's African.
It's also yeah.
I didn't hear what you said, Dalton.
It's African, not Brazilian.
Oh, so the other one's Brazilian.
Irritator.
Irritator's Brazilian. Oxalia is Brazilian.
Oxalia is Brazilian. Yeah. Sigillosaurus, or however you said it, is African. Yes.
Is ichthyovenator also Brazilian?
No, ichthyovenator is from Thailand.
Oh.
Cool, right?
Isn't there one from China too?
I don't know.
Siamovenator or Siamo something?
Possibly. I think that one's also from Thailand, but I could be wrong. Anyway. So, those are the two major groups within Spinosaurus. And what we don't have, a little bit frustratingly, is like an obviously transitional Spinosaur yet. The group kind of shows up super early in the early Cretaceous, and then they're around, and then they really pinch out, and by the end of the Middle Cretaceous, they're gone. Sad. They don't appear to make it into the Late Cretaceous. They have a pretty interesting distribution, too. So early in their evolution, in the early Cretaceous, they're like all over Europe. And then, as we get a little later into the early Cretaceous, we start finding them in Africa, and South America, and Southeast Asia.
It's cool.
Now, if you were to interrogate me, if you were to waterboard me, I would tell you that I believe that there are probably Spinosaurus in North America at some point, based on that European Asian distribution. That's just my personal feeling. I don't think they're there. And this is not there's a Hell Creek Spinosaur, but like I wouldn't be shocked if they ended up there. They appear to persist in the southern hemisphere, so they're maybe evolving in the north, as evidenced by baryonyx and stuff like that, and the like 6 species from Spain, right? There's like a ton of them. Or is that also from England?
There's also those from England. There's like what? Yeah, there's like several from Spain and several from England too. There's the
so they appear to be diverse
cases.
Yeah, and then persist in the southern hemisphere and pitch out. Now their closest relatives are the megalosaurs, or megalosaurs, if you're not doing a bit, which the bit has become real life.
As I say, it's ceased to be a bit for you.
I never thought that was a bit. I just always thought that you said it really stupid.
No, I don't know how it started either. But
well, I mean, Alex's life is kind of always just a bit of Schrodinger's bit of just like...
when was this a joke? Yes. Anyway, so they seem to be very closely related to They're very closely related to megalosaurs. Which have the good manners of being present in the Middle Jurassic and even in the very late early Jurassic, which is nice because, maybe currently these two groups are sister groups, but maybe some of those some of those Jurassic megalosaurs are maybe more closely related to Spinosaurs. Every so often you'll get a phylogeny. I think a cow has one that puts Eustreptospondylus as sister to Spinosaurs, right?
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah, so every so often...
I think that's been actually found multiple times.
Yeah, so every so often that megalosaurs break us up, Eustreptospondylus, some other ones get sorted out, and they kind of have they kind of relatively long maxilla.
I mean, look at Torvosaurus. When we saw it at the Cincinnati Center, it's got a long head.
Yes. And then a call out to Scott's friend who likes Ostafricosaurus, which is a tooth that some people said was a Spinosaur once, but could also be a Ceratosaur.
Shout out to you, Alex. Not you, Alex. You, Alex.
Shout out to you. So yeah, I mean, in timing, the megalosaur Spinosaur clade should be emerging in the early Jurassic, pretty early in the early Jurassic. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention more recent phylogenetic results, which suggest that megalosaurs are actually like more closely related to allosaurs, and spinosaurs are a earlier diverging group of theropods. This is not really the consensus at this moment, but it could become that. And this is based on asphaltovenator. Asphaltovenator, yes. Which is a
hunter.
Incredibly early megalosaur. It's got kind of like a mix of megalosaur and allosaur characters, and it is, if you put, when our colleague and friend Matteo Fabri, hello Al, performed his analysis, it resulted in a clade of megalosaurs and allosaurs to the exclusion of spinosaurs. So, while the position of spinosaurs is controversial, where Spinosaurus goes within it, less so. Is there anything else to say about phylogeny?
I think it's time to dive into some mysteries of history and other various issues. But Alex has Alex, yes.
Should we use this opportunity to talk about possibly chimeric stuff? If there's like multiple species, or is that not something we're going to touch?
So while we're discussing phylogenum, it might behoove us to mention just a little bit of. You hear online a lot about various murmurings of taxonomy, and also a ton of various specimens that you see shared. And it's time to address the murmurs. First of all, there's the Sigilmassosaurus in the room, which is that there are these vertebrae that I believe were originally described in Morocco. But there's a vertebrate taxon called Sigilmassosaurus that when the 2014 paper describing the Neotype of Spinosaurus came out, that paper said, "We found this new specimen. We're making it the Neotype of Spinosaurus for reasons that we'll elaborate on shortly, because it needs a Neotype. Here's the Neotype of Spinosaurus aegypticus. We found it in Morocco. Now, all of the things that have been referred to Spinosaurus maroccensis are just Spinosaurus aegypticus as well. Additionally, Sigilmassosaurus, this taxon known from vertebrae, is also just Spinosaurus. It's Spinosaurus aegypticus. All of these things are just Spinosaurus aegypticus." And kind of, it set a stage for calling pretty much every Spinosaur from the Chem Spinosaurus aegypticus. There has been a back and forth subsequently in the literature over Sigilmassosaurus of people looking at those vertebrae and saying, no, these are distinct from Spinosaurus and they're distinct from what's known from the Neotype, etc. Versus, no, those distinctions are not... the differences you point out aren't diagnostic. They can vary within an individual, so it's not reliably diagnosably different than Spinosaurus. This is possible. I think there is no reason to say offhand that Sigilmassosaurus, what we know, can't be Spinosaurus. But I also think a kind of conservative viewpoint would be to consider there's probably more than one Spinosaur in the Chem than just Spinosaurus aegypticus. And if one of those is Sigilmassosaurus, perhaps that's the case. We run into some other issues. When the Neotype came out, some people thought, oh, is the Neotype itself a chimera? In part because the reconstruction of the paper made a reconstruction of the full skeleton using the Neotype, the holotype, other referred material, and then some bits that were just inferred in between. This is a common practice for creating a composite skeletal, but some people got confused and were like, oh, is the specimen itself a chimera? There was also thoughts that are the vertebrae associated with the pelvis, because as you may be familiar with, the legs of Spinosaurus aegypticus appear to be proportionally pretty small compared to other theropods and what you would typically expect their body plan to be. And some people thought, oh, this might be a younger set of legs from a smaller individual and then larger vertebrae from a different individual. Subsequent publication showing the quarry map of the Neotype site, well, alongside the publication of the tail that they also found and then published on later, puts that to bed pretty much. The Neotype is very likely one individual of a bizarrely proportioned dinosaur. That being said, there is a number of other Spinosaurus referred material that comes from Northern Africa, from Egypt, from Morocco, and I imagine also from other countries in kind of Saharan Africa. That is typically called Spinosaurus, and in part, that's because a lot of this gets sold in the fossil trade, and saying you have Spinosaurus means you can ask for more money. It's a known name, it's a known quantity, it's a big name, it's a big deal. But also partly because we are just lacking in good comparative material across specimens. To the point where there's famously the very big snout that's in Milan. There are bits and bobs of crests. You'll see things online that come out of private collections. There's a lot of stuff because people like Spinosaurus. It's very cool. It's very interesting. And there's all this material in both public and private hands. And it's easy and very simple to just say, oh, this is all Spinosaurus aegypticus. It's all one animal. And it's possible that a lot of it is. It's possible that very little of it is. I think we have to hold in our minds and in our hearts the strong possibility that there is a diversity of Spinosaurs in northern Africa at the in the Cenomanian, and that we are sampling multiple taxa. And while individual specimens may not be chimeric, our understanding of the animal at this juncture probably is. Now, I don't think that that's impacting our assessment of it tremendously at the moment, because we're working mostly with the Neotype. We're mostly working with photos of the holotype because those are the good specimens. And so a lot of the conclusions that have been drawn that we're going to talk about and discuss the debate about later on, I don't think are tremendously affected by the potential for mini taxa to be in this large, not really hypodyme, but large assessment of Moroccan and North African animals. But I think it's important when you see stuff online of this is fossil material from Spinosaurus to recognize that without reliable diagnostic features that can be compared to the Neotype, at the moment, it's difficult to assess this suite of potential animals that live in North Africa.
And maybe we should now talk more about why we're relying on this Neotype. I mean, I think we've obliquely addressed it, right?
Yeah.
We have indeed.
Scott? That's the Scott signal.
That's the Scott signal.
Tell us about World War II, white man.
So, like most good stories about World War II, this one starts in World War I.
That's a good line.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, Spinosaurus, well, actually a little bit before World War I. But, so Spinosaurus was actually, it was discovered in 1912 by this German paleontologist and aristocrat who has a very funny name that I am going to send to Amelia to pronounce properly, because I know I'm going to butcher at least one of the words in here.
That's not too bad, but I see where what parts of this name are frightening to you. Ernst Freiherr Stromer von Reichenbach.
Okay, it was Freiherr. I've been saying Freiherr for a while. Okay.
Yeah. So, well, and fun fact, that's why my name is Zietlow and not Zeitlow. Because in German, in English, typically that pronunciation of E and I is the other way around. So, like, E is pronounced E, IE is pronounced I. In German, it's the other way around.
So, Stromer was a paleontologist who, at that time, was going to Africa in search of the origins of humans. And I've always wanted to look into his specific motivations as to why he was doing that, because there are two reasons. One of them is way less awful than the other.
It's probably not the reason you're hoping for.
Yeah. Because it very well could be that, like, oh, Stromer was looking for the origins of humanity and saw, oh, there's a lot of great apes that seem to be closely related to humans that are from Africa. Maybe humans evolved in Africa. Or the other reason is the bad one. And I have a bad feeling that it was probably the bad one. But I have a little asterisk next to it for a specific reason that we will come back to later. So, like I said, Spinosaurus was discovered in 1912, and there are some pretty famous photos of the very fragmentary but very weird and impressive specimen from when it was taken back to Munich and fully prepped. Now, as James alluded to a little bit ago, something happened in Europe during the 40s, and specifically centered around Germany.
You've really entered officer-involved passive voice here. It's
Germany-involved war. Germany-involved war. So World War II happened. So during the bombing of Germany and major German cities by the Allies, a lot of German scientists and museum directors were trying to get a lot of their collections out of the line of fire. And this was the case at the Munich Museum as well. The Munich Museum was in the process of evacuating a lot of their collections. But Stromer was having an issue doing this. Namely, the director of the museum was a Nazi, and Stromer was not. So he was actually lower on the priority list to get his stuff out because he was not a party member. Hence why I have the little, maybe overly hopeful asterisk next to why was he in Africa looking for the origins of humanity. I mean, he managed to surpass the bar of not a literal actual Nazi. So he must do no wrong, surely. But so, unfortunately, he did not manage to get his fossils out in time, and the museum was bombed. And the only known specimen of Spinosaurus at that time, along with a lot of other things like Bahariosaurus and several other Egyptian dinosaurs from that expedition, basically like everything he found, was purged in glorious Allied fire. And I remember that there was a line I saw about this ages ago that was incredibly poignant, and I don't remember where I found it, but it was a description of Ernst Stromer that said that read that unfortunately, despite being a very good paleontologist who made a lot of impactful discoveries, he is much more famous for what he has lost than what he had found. And
oof.
Yeah. So, and that's the end of Spinosaurus. For quite a while, until basically a century later, when it's genuinely, it's like 101 years or 99 years. It's on either side. Yeah, it was the new specimen discovered in 2011 or 2013?
Something like that.
Because it was published in 2014.
11.
Well,
I want to say, yeah. So, cut to 2011, 99 years after the discovery, after the original discovery of Spinosaurus, when the new specimen gets discovered and that one's in the Chem.
yes.
Yeah, and that one's in the Chem group of the Chem beds of Morocco, and we've already talked quite a bit about Chem and Bahariya and stuff. But yeah, that one was discovered by Nizar Ibrahim's team. Well, actually, it was discovered by someone else first, who then told them about where it was. Right?
I believe in the kind of condensed version of this story is that Nizar and /or Nizar's contacts noticed material that seemed decent, because there's been like the discovery of the Neotype is incredibly important, but there has been isolated chunks of Spinosaur found in North Africa between 1940s and now. They just have been chunks. Like famously, the Milan snout was found in between then. But my understanding of the Neotype story is that either Nizar or one of his associates noticed good material in the hands of private collectors or people who were trying to sell it on the fossil market, and was able to either negotiate getting that material and also negotiate access to where did you find this. And when they went back to where they found the material that had already been excavated, they found the rest of the Neotype.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I don't know when exactly that happened.
That is also my understanding. I believe the material was in a and not like private collectors, like in the large, well-funded multinational opportunity, not opportunity, but operations rather, but like very local private collectors who make their living selling fossils that they're finding, which are usually like bits of croc teeth, mosasaur teeth, spinosaur teeth, and everything, and they had found something really spectacular here.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Although, I mean, I'm not trying to downplay the importance of the specimen or anything, but it is not it's not really a Rosetta Stone specimen. It is very important, and it's all we have right now, but it is it unfortunately does open the door for a lot of questions. Right, it's not Dinosaurus. It's not I feel like there's another example.
Well, I think Dinosaurus is the one that really like nails it, because it's also a specimen that was famously enigmatic and was also discovered around the same time and published the same year.
Yeah, no, I think that's probably, it was a weird year for big sailed theropods.
It was, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, right. It's not like that where we just say, oh, now we understand everything. Like, we got a lot, but questions have remained. And if you've been a paleontology fan since all of this happened, you probably know that pretty well.
Yeah. And we'll get into a bit of kind of the history of interpretation of Spinosaurus from this, because this kind of goes a long way to explaining the updates of Spinosaurus that you see in certain time periods. That Spinosaurus goes through a lot of iterations as our understanding of dinosaurs themselves change and our understanding of Spinosaurids as a group develops. That I remember back when I gave a public talk on kind of like how our understanding of dinosaurs had changed a while ago. It was before I even went to the AMNH. It was back when like, I'll get to it in a minute, but I found it interesting that some of the first depictions of some of the very early depictions of Spinosaurus frequently show it as being quadrupedal, which I think is probably just people looking at this thing with a big sail and looking at Dimetrodon and just going, aha, I've seen this before.
Connect the dots.
Connect the dots. I have 2 points, therefore I have a line. But and after that, it kind of goes, I guess, back to the original interpretation that Stromer illustrated in his notes of kind of like generalized Carnosaur with big sail. And then after the discovery, I guess, after the discovery of like baryonyx and Suchomimus, that it kind of adapted to what we see here of this very large, very long snouted, long-legged, like general theropod shaped animal, but with a very long crocodilian snout and a sail on its back. And then after the discovery of the Neotype, it kind of changed once again to this much longer bodied, longer necked, longer tailed, and no, Elwood, don't eat my chili.
No, Elwood.
Father, I crave the chili.
He craves the chili. It's too spicy for kitties. This long necked, long bodied, long tailed, but short legged and longer armed, goofy kind of proportioned animal that we see showing up at around 2014, which I also do think is funny, is it then starts the resurrection of the quadrupedal Spinosaurus again for a little bit, and then it goes away again. And then most recently with the discovery, with the publication of Matteo Fabri's Swimmy Tail. And that is not a tail that Matteo Fabri helped work on. It is the one that he physically has himself. He hides it very well when in his clothing. But yeah, no, this joke is stupid.
Swims like a guy.
Oh my God, right? It's crazy. But yeah, is that the rough shape of?
I think that's a good rough shape of it.
That is
Okay.
I also don't know what Stromer's motivation for seeking human origins in Africa were. Given that he was not just not a Nazi, but he was apparently pretty disgusted with the Nazi party. I'm not going to say he wasn't racist, or certainly wouldn't be considered racist in our time, because I know very little about him, and presumably most people from that period would be considered that now. But I also don't think this is like a manifestation of like scientific super racism.
He's not Osborne.
He's not Osborne, no. I think a lot of people had basically said what you said of like, well, the non-human animals that look the most like humans live in Africa. So yeah, this is generally the shape of it. And I think Dalton's point that he made earlier, and I also apologize for any points that I did not hear because my internet has been cutting in and out for this whole video. So I've basically waited to be able to monologue so that time differential with everybody else will not matter so much.
He's doing maneuvers around Gargantua.
Exactly. One minute of my recording is 7 years on Earth. So the problem with Spinosaurus has been mainly generated by the fact that the holotype specimen no longer existed. And there's sort of two things that I think are interesting to talk about with the Neotype. One is that if you're not aware of what a Neotype is, I think this is a really good introduction to it. I hear the idea of a Neotype being given a lot for like a case where you have a bad holotype and people say like, oh, we should give it a Neotype.
Like Chronosaurus was a case for that.
Right. A Neotype is generally recommended in the condition of either the type being undiagnostic, but the taxon being in widespread use. And so generally it would be considered like better to put the name on something concretely than not use the name again.
Or Allosaurus, another example.
Well, Allosaurus is a good example of that, where the type exists but is not diagnostic as Allosaurus. Mm-hmm. I think with, there's been a kind of push within paleo that I know I don't fully agree with, where a lot of these cases we say, well, the type's undiagnostic, so I'm going to name my own thing. And, by the rules, and I think in the interest of preserving prevailing usage, it is usually better to say, well, we're all using this name. The type's not so good. Let's choose something else to hold the name. But what that means implicitly is that you're accepting that the concept of the animal is going to change. A Neotype replaces the type, right? This is not an additional type. You can erect a paratype if you want to make another formal reference specimen. I think that that's a little bit fraught with risk because you don't know that both things belong to the same taxon. But in a condition where you've got a pretty crappy type and a really good potential specimen, and that potential that new specimen that's much better is going to probably be the reference for a long time, it might make sense to formally say like this is a paratype. This is another specimen you can use to establish the taxon. But a Neotype replaces it. And so I've seen a lot of kind of discussion in our community about whether or not it's acceptable to make Neotypes for certain taxa. I know Dalton and I actually had a little bit of a disagreement on camera about this with Introodon, depending on we're not really sure. That paper's not out yet. It might be out before this video is released, but I'm not sure. I have no idea what the timeline is. But the long and short of it is, if the new material from the Two Medicine formation is erected as the Neotype of Troodon, that means the name Troodon is being moved from whatever from the Judith River was called Troodon before, to probably a different species that we're then calling Troodon formosus. Does that matter? Not really. You're effectively changing what specimen the name goes to, with the understanding that that might actually not be the same species, but you're stabilizing the name to what's used. So in the case of Spinosaurus, the original specimen was destroyed and obliterated. The second specimen, that's probably the same animal, Spinosaurus B, that Stromer also had collected, was destroyed. And so well, this new specimen that's relatively complete is going to become the reference. It doesn't really matter if it is truly the same thing that Stromer found, but that's going to wind up hinging or being kind of a linchpin of a lot of these debates, because there's constant efforts to try to make the new specimen align with Stromer's specimen. And it is possible that some of the mismatch between them with scaling or proportions, it is possible that they're not actually the same animal. Right? This is equivalent to put it in modern animal terms, if there were no more lions in existence and we lost all the specimens, but we still knew, like, a lion was a big cat that we talked about occasionally, but we had specimens that were being called lions that were actually tigers. In this context, you might say, well, all of the specimens we're calling a lion are this, and so we're going to apply the name to that. You've changed what lion really is, but what you're doing is stabilizing the concept of the species to the specimens that are actually used for the concept of the species. It's a little bit of is it correct to call this a little bit postmodern? Like, the species is the specimens that we're calling that species to some degree. Like, you know what I mean? The animal didn't have its name back then. It has its name now. It doesn't matter a little bit. Regardless, that's the whole Neotype thing. And so this is a replacement. Whatever this animal is, that's now Spinosaurus. Now, if you want to make a paleontologist, say you're like maybe interviewing for a graduate school position, or you're at a conference, and you say, like, I would really like to emotionally exhaust the person I'm talking to. I want to make it, I would like their first impression of me to be not positive. I recommend that you tell them, man, it's funny that Spinosaurus keeps getting patch notes, right? We love that joke. So, and by what I mean here is there's kind of two things. One, I think many practicing scientists don't like likening progress in the field to something annoying like a video game being updated repeatedly. But also, and so this is just my pro tip. Maybe this is not the line to use when you're meeting somebody who's like 60 years old and probably doesn't think about patch notes in the way that you're using it.
Even if you're meeting someone else who is perhaps close to your age, but that is like already at the program that you're applying to, don't do that. It's an interview. You should be professional and talk about your own research and things that are taken seriously. Otherwise, who's to say? Sometimes people at the institution who are not actually interviewing you are asked for feedback.
Yes.
And part of that feedback might be whether or not you fit into the program.
Yeah.
It could be.
And I can assure you,
indeed,
that if you ever, so in the future, Dalton, James, myself, and Amelia will probably have lab positions. And if you want to get into the field and you interview with us and you tell Scott, I researched lab positions, not prepared. Or
I was about to say, I have a lab.
I apologize. That was not intended as a slight. And if you come to us and you at some point in your interview say, I saw this funny thing on Discord, or you tell a joke that I have seen because I'm also on the internet, I will think less of you. And so will James and Amelia and Dalton.
And what I mean here is I'm trying to not be too severe. Like, listen, I was young in the field once. Like, I certainly know the way I interacted with the field as a fan versus as I was becoming a professional. There's a little bit why I give this advice is just like, we take our research seriously because nobody else will. So yes. Like, and I don't even mean that as a joke. Like, I care about the things I'm working on because I spend a lot of time working on them because I think they're important. And so generally I find it frustrating if it's like likened to something kind of that feels more like meaningless or frivolous. That's just me. We do this because we love what we do, because it certainly doesn't pay well enough to justify the 90-hour weeks that we work frequently. It is a little bit for the love of the game. But I also tell you this a little bit because I think in this particular case, this bit that goes around the internet a little bit or a lot annoys me. And it annoys me because I think it kind of gets at what feels like a dishonest portrayal of what scientific progress looks like.
Yes,
And
very,
I
very
think
much
that's
so.
like, to be clear, we joke about things in the field a lot. I'm not saying like once you were talking about fossils, you must be deadly serious at all times. Like
You've watched this channel.
You've watched this channel. You've heard me make the 88 million newtons joke. We've talked about it since. Like,
the joke when he couldn't do
you've
math.
heard me do math poorly on hour 2 of a 5-hour recording that was going to.
There we go.
What I'm saying is this is not me saying you can't bring humor into your professional life. We all do, and we all appreciate that we do, because humor makes life better.
Just don't do it in an interview.
Well, don't do it in an interview. Maybe I think there's a time and a place, but also like I think what paleontologists may balk at is a humor that feels like it is kind of coming from a perspective where you don't really get or internalize what scientific progress is. And science is iterative hypothesis testing, right? That is what the scientific method is. That thing that you had to remember and write out the steps for in middle school. Or if you went to school in the South, that you are probably hearing of just now for the first time. Just like just Trump on the tarmac, the scientific method. What can I say? I'm just hearing about it now for the first time.
The voice coming out of your computer is not a ghost. Southern viewership. There's not a little man trapped in your TV screen. General Grievous ads.
This is something that I think is not communicated well in the educational system in general, and I say that from the perspective of like I was very fortunate. Like I grew up in a state with a generally really like strong public education program, and I grew up in a very nice school district with a lot of great teachers. And I'm not trying to malign my education in any way. I'm very fortunate to have had the quality of early instruction that I did. But the thing that I don't think I really understood was like what science fundamentally is. It is like you are testing things iteratively to refine your understanding of the world. I think I even going into college understood it much more about like learning facts. You know, like I understood science of like, ooh, we now need to know the material constant of like that material or something. And like, once we get that, we're finished. What's happening with Spinosaurus is that we're discovering more material and we're learning more about the animal. And that means that it necessitates changes to our understanding. If you don't know about the sail on like the kind of continued fin on the tail, if you don't have that material, there's no way you would have ever predicted that. That's not a part of the original understanding of the animal. When you find that, it means you now need to reinterpret it, right? The best anatomical descriptions, especially when they're new material about species that are already named, are reassessments of what was known and integration of new data to learn more about it. It might be testing it in a phylogenetic matrix with a lot more data to understand its position. It might be trying to shed light on the phylogenetic positions of other animals because now you have better reference. There's a lot that we can do with this stuff. And I think that the whole patch notes thing like rubs me the wrong way because it makes it feel like a little bit that it's like scientists fucking around and trying to find like the right balance, or that we don't know what we're doing and we're just throwing stuff at the wall. When what it is there's multiple teams of scientists studying this material, trying to integrate all of the data possible to understand what it was like or something fundamental about its biology. And
that's definitely the impression that I've got from chatting with people who know enough about paleontology to know that like Spinosaurus has changed a lot. Is that there almost seems to be an attitude of like everything's wrong. Of right. Just like it was like, oh well, that was wrong, this was wrong, this was wrong, this was wrong. Now we have this kind of like this almost like not stated directly, but just like, oh, what's the next thing we're going to find out about this and find out that this is wrong, sort of thing. And not as James described as kind of like it's shaving off the sides and getting closer and closer in to what we actually know about the animal.
Right. This is also like, I think scientific decision making is like, it is trying to use the information you have to understand what you can. There may be things you don't know. And I think like I encountered this a lot with like prediction stuff. Like, I don't know. I was talking with somebody recently about like potential shakeups to the stock market coming up right now because, you know, this is December. We have no idea what January is going to look like, but people are predicting that the economy is going to do some things. And it's like, okay, how do you know what businesses will do well or something? Right? Are there indicators that can tell you what's going to happen? And I think a lot of people look at times where like there are isolated instances where an indicator may not tell you the right thing. And we say, well, okay, there's no way to predict it. And I'd say, well, like you have some information, right? You can probably use the information you have to at least make an educated guess. It's not random. That doesn't mean it's always right. And in this case, we use the information we have about an animal to, you know, to understand it to the degree that we possibly can, right? You're not going to be able to necessarily bound the things you can't, but you will still have something and you can still make decisions and you can still find the information that is revealed. I do like Scott's metaphor of like, you're carving away what you know is not the case. That's generally what we're really doing. I think that you know, we weren't getting it wrong. We had no way to know what was not right. This is also, I think, conversely, why there was a little bit of discourse about this today on Twitter. And so that's why I think it might be on my mind. But there's like, I don't generally like my modern paleo media always insisting on depicting animals that are known from very little material. Like we talked about this a little bit with Path of Titans, of like a lot of animals are the more poorly known and understood counterpart to something else. If you are depicting Picnomiosaurus or Picnomamasaurus, or I forget exactly how to pronounce its name, and you are depicting Carnotaurus, you're not depicting Picnomiosaurus. And the same principle as Spinosaurus applies. Of you may have a little piece of evidence that says that a bone looked like the Carnotaurus bone. If you're extrapolating the whole animal, you're making the same potential mistakes we'd make with Spinosaurus without knowing about its swimmy tail. And I think what that means is if you're doing this for media, it's generally best to choose things that we actually know some stuff about, or to understand that like this is not a scientifically, I don't know what the right way to phrase this is. It's not a scientifically bounded understanding of something. Like, you know, let's talk about, here's one where I'll pick on myself a little bit maybe. The depiction of Curricula in Prehistoric Planet. Like, that's essentially a depiction of Velociraptor. Do I think Curricula looked very different from Velociraptor? No. And that's the most scientifically informed depiction you could make of that animal based on the material we have at present. Right? We know it's a dromaeosaur. We know it's a Velociraptorian. Probably looked a lot like Velociraptor. But we don't really know what the body proportions were like, other than that Kuru seems to have had like a longer limb relative to Velociraptor and a slightly smaller claw. There's a lot of stuff we don't really know about. You can't necessarily bound it. You always want to go with, when you don't have information, with what I can derive from the fossils that I do have. And so if you're trying to understand Spinosaurus and you only have theropods without a fin on their tail, you're not going to guess the fin. It's not because you were wrong. This was the only information. This was the only conclusion you could derive from the information available. And even if it's not correct, I think there's a difference between that and just being wrong. And I think that's something that's important to think about in science is, you know, I'm writing papers right now that criticize a lot of prior work. And when I write those papers, I always try to think, what is something that is a conclusion that I'm disagreeing with because the information was not available to the person at the time, versus this person made an incorrect interpretation of this specimen or this group of animals that was avoidable because they could have made the right call.
Mm-hmm.
Right. This is why, like, I don't really harsh on like old theropod systematists for not getting that tyrannosaurs or coelurosaurs. Like, they didn't really have a lot of information about large theropods in their systematics at the time. Right. There were like fewer than 10 well-represented theropods. You know, that's not something to really criticize them over. I would instead criticize, like, say, Henry Fairfield Osborn over writing the preface to the book that is known as Hitler's Bible. I think that's a much more fair criticism of Osborn as a man.
Yeah.
Right? Than like, oh, he got some stuff wrong about dinosaurs. Anyway, that's kind of my spiel about this and the swimmy tail. I think we should probably get into what the meat of the debate actually is. But I'm just trying to say, these are not like this is not everybody's guessing and we're always proving each other wrong. This is, we have data, we're trying to test our hypotheses to figure out what's right and what's wrong. And this is also, I'm sorry, I'm not done with the spiel. This is something that I think is very important to understand about science journalism, is that science journalism often doesn't represent this stuff right. In paleo, it's actually pretty good. I like a lot of paleo journalists. Many people who cover the paleosphere who I work with are fantastic. I find it a lot more in like health journalism, right? This is like, science can't make up its mind. Coffee is good for you. Coffee is bad for you. Red wine's good for your heart. Red wine causes cancer. What is it? Why can't the scientists make their mind up? It's because these are different experiments with different samples, like different sample sizes and different sample systems, testing the questions differently and trying to find a consilience on what the answer is.
Yes.
And it can be simultaneous. It could be simultaneously true that red wine's good for your heart and makes you more likely to get cancer. It may also be that these are random effects that wind up not manifesting in other studies. Or it might be that, different ways of assessing the question give you a different answer.
Or it might be that red wine companies paid you off to make a study that...
Yes. And in this case, Big Spinosaurus paid us off to trick everybody into thinking it was a terrestrial animal instead of an aquatic one.
No, I was going to make the joke of, you don't need to worry about that in paleontology because nobody's paying us.
Oh, that is true. But I think in paleo, this is the end of the spiel, I promise this time. Alex and Dalton and I have talked about this a lot. I think Amelia may have talked about it a little bit in the Tylosaurus video, but I don't remember exactly. But like, one thing I often hear here is like, nobody can figure out what kind of animal X group is, Compsognathids, Megaraptorans, or whatever. They keep coming out in different places in these studies. And what I always say is, what matrix are they using? Because generally, actually, different matrices may give you different answers because there's different inclusions of taxa and different inclusions of characters. And the different combinations of those things often mean that some answers are different. That is not scientists going both ways. That is the way you test this hypothesis affects the potential answer. If you've got a new taxon and you don't know exactly what it is, often the best thing to do is code it in multiple matrices and assess conflicting positions. But you may also have really good reason to not code it in other matrices. If you can justify that decision, it's okay. But if, say I have a matrix that makes Megaraptorans Tyrannosaurs, and I have one that makes them Allosaurs, and I find something that I think is a Megaraptoran, I would probably score it in both matrices. However, I may say, well, I've worked with one of these and know that a lot of the characters are scored incorrectly based on my own observations, and so I'm not going to put it there. So I'm only going to publish it in the Megaraptorans are Tyrannosaurids matrix in this example. That paper will not then also be testing the hypothesis that Megaraptorans are Allosaurs, right? I'm not finding additional support for them as Tyrannosaurs. The way I've constructed the study is telling me what possibilities you have. And this is true in medical research, where how you design your mouse models or your cell cultures that you're testing drugs on and what drugs you're administering to get the result you want will affect your answer. That's the end of the spiel. How science works is really important. And I say this not just because I'm frustrated with the public discourse over science, but I think one of the hardest things for young people breaking into the field to start to learn is how science really works. And I think that hopefully if you're watching this and you're an aspiring paleontologist, maybe this helps get you thinking in kind of the right way that'll set you up for later success. Because thinking about what science really is and what its practitioners are doing every day is I think a very helpful way for you to start out thinking about your career. That's it. I'm done. Does somebody else want to talk about the debate over this animal swimming?
So the reason, dear viewer, why James has just monologued so much about the scientific method and the process of science, and why we do sometimes get frustrated when we see remarks like, "Oh, it's always changing. It's people can't make up their mind," is because there are competing ideas about what kind of lifestyle Spinosaurus would have led. And those competing ideas have evolved with our understanding of Spinosaurus, the animal. As we, this is unsurprising, perhaps, to anyone who has a conception of science, but as we accrue more information, we can draw new and better conclusions from that information. And so when Spinosaurus was first found, and you had a dentary and some teeth and some spines, there was discussion, I think, even back then, of, hey, maybe this thing ate fish because it's got conical teeth. That idea was only further supported with the discovery of things like baryonyx that clearly have this longirostran face that's very reminiscent of a crocodile or other fish-eating things. They've got conical teeth, which fish-eating animals tend to have. And more data has really kind of hammered home that spinosaurs are predominantly eating fish. Now, I'd want to make it abundantly clear and recognize, of course, the baryonyx holotype has iguanodontium remains in the gut contents. There is a pterosaur in the gut contents of a South American spinosaur. Or is it wounds on a pterosaur from a spinosaur?
It's dumber. It's dumber. I like when I remember when I did the Dinovember for Irritator, because I had always. Are you good? Sorry, he just chased his tail so fast that he ran into the wall.
Fool.
That there's a vertebral column of an ornithochiroid pterosaur from the Rumwaldo that has a tooth in it that looks like it's a spinosaur tooth, and so they're saying it's Irritator.
Okay. Well,
that's such strong evidence.
That's strong evidence. But what it does suggest is that some kind of spinosaur,
yes,
ate a pterosaur at one point. And if hunted it, scavenged it, regardless, all this is to say, right, that there's an abundance of evidence, anatomical, isotopic, etc., that spinosaurines mostly eat fish, but they don't turn down other sources of food, right? They are dietary specialists, but that doesn't mean they only eat one thing. Just wanted to clear that ground before we say Spinosaurus eats fish. We suspect it was specialized on eating fish, and we have reached general agreement on that as we've discovered more and more information about Spinosaurus and its close relatives. I apologize for having to attack my eyeball here as I speak, but allergies do be like that sometimes. Now,
they do be like
the Spinosaurus eating fish in and of itself, not a tremendously controversial idea, and that's not why there is a big back and forth in the literature right now. Why there is a back and forth in the literature right now is because how Spinosaurus went about eating those fish and how it spent its time kind of day-to-day writ large became a subject of debate as the Neotype was described, in part because of its bizarre proportions, so its very short legs. Previously, and you can see this kind of in the game, if any of them are eating, that would be helpful, but we've seen them eat several times. There is evidence that Spinosaurus and Spinosaurus at the tip of its snout has a bunch of nerve endings that make the snout sensitive. And when it is restored as this kind of tall animal, one can conceive of it sticking its head in the water and waiting for fish to trigger those sensory structures, and then it bites the fish and eats them. All well and good. And this kind of, quote, like heron style wading makes sense for something that's tall because we tend to think of wading animals as being tall and on kind of stilty legs. Spinosaurus, as we conceive of it now, is not a tall animal. It's very low to the ground because it has proportionally very small legs and a proportionally small pelvis when compared to other theropods. And it's also quite long. So that invokes some interesting locomotory ideas, which is where we mentioned it before, the kind of potential revitalization of a quadruped Spinosaur, but this time as a knuckle walker. That we don't have good data from the forelimbs for Spinosaurus that would support or reject that. But it seemed odd at the time, considering no theropod has done that ever. Not impossible, but it seems unlikely, right? And then, lo and behold, the discovery of the tail, which we have referred many times to as the swimmy tail. Because what was determined is that the sail on Spinosaurus' back, while not directly continuous, there does appear to be some kind of a gap over the sacrum and the beginning of the tail. There is a sail on the tail as well. The neural spines of the caudal vertebrae, the tail vertebrae, are also elongated into these thin rods that we suspect would have supported a sail-like structure going down much of the tail of Spinosaurus. And this changed the game because we've not seen anything like this in a dinosaur before. It's very strange. And it poses a bunch of questions related to, does this organ serve a function? And does it serve a function beyond display, which is what is often invoked for strange features in dinosaurs?
It's a religious artifact.
No, that's how you know the difference between paleontology and archaeology.
Yeah. One thing that the tail did, which is fairly non-disputed and is interesting, is that reconstructing with the additional mass of the tail, understanding how the tail is actually constructed, changes the center of gravity of the animal, and it's bipedal. That's something that's often overlooked from the original publication of the tail, but it's discussed in that publication that when they model the mechanics of how this thing would have had kind of its resting posture, the weight of that tail pulls the torso up, and you don't have to contend with knuckle walking Spinosaurus. But the tail is similar to features that we see in things like the sailfin lizard, and it's similar to what we see in Triton, the newt. Now,
that's its name? That's rad.
Contentious is that in sailfin lizards, there's not strong evidence that the tail is used as a propulsory organ. These lizards do swim, but it doesn't seem that they're swimming any better than other lizards because of their tail. And more aquatic lizards like the marine iguana, right, don't have a quote-unquote swimmy tail. But in newts, it does seem to provide a propulsory advantage, which is what they draw direct comparison to in the 2021 paper, whenever that came out.
I think it's 2020.
And they contend that Spinosaurus has this tail because it's spending most of its time in the water, and it's using it as a propulsive organ to swim, or at least to aid in its swimming, right? Other researchers have come to a different conclusion. And I think what's important to note here is, like James mentioned this, we are trying to use as much data as possible to support the hypothesis. We are now, and the reason why we are at this kind of back and forth is we're operating at the limits of the data that we have now, right? Everyone has essentially the same understanding of Spinosaurus, and we're trying to then push our understanding to the limits based on what we can do with that information. And so other teams, the Serino-led team, or if not Serino-led, the Serino-associated team, and other researchers as well, Holtz and Hone have their paper about this too, have come out and said, we don't think that this tail supports this animal as being like swimming most of the time, that it's spending most of its time submerged. We do still think it's eating fish and spending a lot of time in the water, but we still support a kind of standing, sit and wait, heron-y lifestyle for this thing. And that the tail fin would have mostly just been a display structure. Other arguments have entered the field, including the actual sail on the back would have led this to be, not hydrodynamically efficient, and it may have kind of rolled over from wave action in the water. There's a lot to consider, and then of course there is the histology of it all, which is that Matteo Fabri's team sectioned the bones of Spinosaurus and found that they're exceptionally dense, particularly when compared to other theropods, but just even in general, Spinosaurus has very, very dense bones. And dense bones today are often associated with things that swim and spend time submerged in the water because it helps offset the buoyancy of the animal that comes from things like the lungs, that come from things like lipids in the body, that generally make animals neutrally to positively buoyant, which is to say they float. If you want to spend most of your time submerged, it behooves you to acquire features that let you passively sink, because you don't want to have to be always expending energy to stay below the water. And it seems that Spinosaurus may have said features in its very dense bones. Alternative models have then come out suggesting that the potential distribution of air sacs in Spinosaurus may have offset gains in negative buoyancy from the dense bones, and that the animal still would have been positively buoyant and floating. And there are merits and demerits, really, to both sides of these arguments, but I'll let my other colleagues kind of elaborate on what those are.
Hello. It's me.
It's the other colleague.
Dalton has been very measured and cool. And I will also be measured and cool because there's a lot of people working hard on this question, and it's easy to become find sides on the side of a scientific debate and hurl insults and be like, oh, these people don't know what they're talking about. But I like to believe that people are engaging at least in good faith and that people are putting their best foot forward. I do have some problems, and I do have an opinion though on which side is correct. And I'm going to express some of my concerns. The heron hypothesis. Now, Dalton has touched on this much in his discussion, and he did a very good job summarizing. And there are lines of evidence that are used to suggest a kind of shoreline wading, snib-snab, hunting lifestyle for our good friend, the Spinosaurus aegypticus. And I see some of these repeated online, and that's fine. You can think what you like. Some of them I would just like to discuss briefly. There's been some stuff that has been said about the retraction of the nares and Spinosaurs. So, if you were to look at a Spinosaurus skull, Irritator, Spinosaurus, Baryonyx, etc., you'll see that the nares are like halfway along the snout. There's a front half, like the snout's long in the front, and the nose, the nostrils are not on the end, as in they are in crocodiles and alligators and most other reptiles. So this has been suggested to be evidence of perhaps a wading ecology, in that they can dip their snouts in the water and still breathe as they kind of trail their snouts. And it's entirely possible that they could do this because of the position of their nares. This has been compared to wading birds, and here's my problem with this. If you are making a long-snouted reptile, you can do this in two ways. You can expand the length of the premaxilla, or you can expand the length of the maxilla. Now, we're bone people, so we often really just think about bones. But there's a lot of other important things in the skull. You may have heard this. You may have heard that there are things like your brain, or your nasal passageways in your skull. These are important things that develop early and control kind of the formation of how bones develop around them. So, in animals where the snout's elongated because the maxilla gets elongated, you go boop, 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 boop. The nostrils are always on the tip of the snout. This is true. This is the alligator, crocodile, gharial condition. However, if you're making your snout elongate through extending your premaxilla, regardless of your ecology, your nose holes will be halfway up your face. This is true of literally every bird. Desert birds have wading positions on their nostrils. So, I don't know, kind of seems like just something that happens if you extend your rostrum with an elongate premaxilla. This is also the case in phytosaurs, which are a crocodile analog. They have extended their snouts with a huge premaxilla. Their nostrils are like right in front of their eyes, like a snorkel tube. And this is because of the relative development of the nasal passageway. If you're extending your maxilla, your nasal passageway is extending forward. If you're extending your premaxilla, if you're just extending the tip, not your nasal passageway is not necessarily going that far forward. Like in phytosaurs, it's just two long rods of bone. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I remember you brought this up very glibly, which is out of character
glib?
for you, I know. Yeah, in the Chronosaurus video.
Yes, this is exactly what also happens in marine reptiles. Is that they at least in pliosaurs, is that their rostrums are extended because they extend their premaxilla. I wouldn't call them wading animals. Anyway, so I have a laundry list of issues with the idea that the wading heron hypothesis is somehow more, we'll say, parsimonious with the data than a submerged hypothesis. I don't think necessarily, like, I'm not saying that, oh, it's wrong, but the idea that it is the stronger collection of ideas than the idea that, like, it's submerged, doing some kind of submerged something because its bones are dense is not particularly compelling to me. I have, and this is not an independent or original thought to mine. I've always conceived of Spinosaurus as kind of like a hippo-y or crocodile-y animal, just kind of hanging out and sitting at the bottom and snapping at things. But, you know, those are my feelings. Also, Dalton, and pardon me if I perhaps missed this when you were discussing it. Did you talk about like the Mateo's like results of the sailtail?
No, I did not. If you'd like to bring them up, go for it.
I'll just very briefly touch on this. A lot has been said that Spinosaurus is probably not super. It's not like, you know, this is not a zoom swimmer. And I think the results of the Sereno analysis that are like, hey, this animal probably is not like, I don't know, diving super fast after prey, like high in the water column. And I think
it's not a swordfish.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like the sail is a mechanical issue for swimming. It's a big, huge thing that, sure, maybe you're dragging. But Fabry et al. Do show that the sail on the tail, like, we know theropods are swimming. And they demonstrate in their results that a sailed tail is like giving you an entire order of magnitude more swimming ability than like an Allosaurus. It's not quite as good as an alligator or a croc, but like, it's all right. It's better than nothing. It's something. This is almost a 50-foot long animal. My third and final thing I would like to say about some of the things I don't necessarily agree with in prior literature. The response paper to the density paper argued that Spinosaurus could not submerge, or would have a very difficult time submerging because of its buoyancy. Now, this is an inference that is, I would say, in a assumption abstracted further than the Fabry results, in which they say pachyostodic bones, dense, sink, and they do some math. We like math, folks. And the Sereno team, they do math too. And we also like math. However, in their construction of their model, they give their Spinosaurus. So we've talked about air sacs on this channel before, the outgrowths of the lung that are present in birds that are responsible for their efficient respiratory system. These air sacs then invade the axial skeleton in many birds, but not all of them. But kind of important. And that this system is also present in dinosaurs, especially theropods and sauropods, not really in ornithischians. The model that they discuss mostly in that paper is reconstructed with a like crown bird level of pneumaticity and like the size of the lungs, the development of the air sacs, etc. All of this affects the model's ability to submerge. We have no idea how big the lungs of Spinosaurus are. We have no idea what the air sacs look like. We have no idea what most of the axial column's pneumaticity looks like. So the air sacs are not the parts that go into the bone. Those are diverticula from the air sacs, or sometimes the lungs, as found in a paper about ostriches, that attach those structures to the axial skeleton. The condition in Spinosaurus is like bog standard theropod. There are some air sac diverticuli in the cervical vertebra, and then like a little bit, like the first few dorsals, I think, have a pleurocoel in them. That is like the normal theropod condition. That this is like some crown bird pneumatic theropod is, I don't think, consistent with the data. That's my interpretation of it. Additionally, there was a cool paper that came out recently that looked at the relative internal development of these diverticula, these branches of air sacs in vertebra. This team looked at Majungasaurus, a early diverging ceratosaur, which does have a lot of external pits for those air sacs, and they looked at Rahonavis, a much more closer relative of birds. And what they found was pretty cool, which is even though ceratosaurs have like pretty excavated vertebra for the pleuroseals, the like internal inflation of the centrum, how large are the spaces between these little lamina of bone, is more primitive. The bones are still pretty dense, versus the closer you get to birds, these internal spaces expand and the weight reduction is more extensive. Spinosaurus is kind of down on the tree. And so while I don't know the internal condition of these centra, and personally, I would suspect it was probably more like ceratosaurs and allosaurs. All this to say, perhaps Spinosaurus would not have as hard a time submerging as has been suggested. That's it.
I want to put a little spin on it from my personal observations about the whole debate. Is that one of the things that I found a little puzzling about the Spinosaurus probably wasn't a super powerful, fast swimmer comment is that it, at least to me, seems like it's not taking into account environment, in that it wasn't in these big open ocean areas where there's a lot of water to be able to move through very quickly. It's in big rivers and lakes and stuff. Like, and mostly like we find it in rivers that I don't think that even a really big river has that much room for a 50-foot animal to get going that fast.
And like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think anyone was proposing that it was marine. Like, no. At least from my perspective of not really paying attention to dinosaurs most of the time, when the response paper, or not, I guess not response, maybe, I don't know. When the Serino paper came out and was like, wait, hold on, let me just read the title. Spinosaurus is not an aquatic dinosaur. I was like, first of all, there's arguments over what aquatic really means and how you define that. But if you were to translate that as marine, if I'm going to be charitable, to be blunt, no one was saying it was marine. No one was saying that it was swimming in the ocean, to my knowledge, or doing like these top speed pursuit underwater things that they're trying to debunk. It's like, okay, you've created a problem that you've gotten mad at, and now you've tested some things against it. That was my perspective, at least. The other like issue I take with that paper in that title and with saying that it's not aquatic is like, regardless of how good a swimmer this thing was, which is what it seems to actually be about, it was definitely living in the water. Like, there's another paper I found earlier today that like there's like these fossil sites. I can't remember if it was Chem or a different one. But like they find more Spinosaur teeth in some of these areas than fish teeth and Onchopristis teeth. I think that means the Spinosaur was hanging out in the water. And I think if you as an animal are hanging out in the water so much that your teeth are more common than a fish's teeth, I think you like the water enough to be called aquatic. Like, I don't think that they're routinely just like straight vibing on the beach and all dying on the beach and never going in the water. Also, when they are proportioned like this, with a tail like this and a long fish catching croc face.
I think there are like two lines in the original, so the Ibrahim 2020 paper is the swimmy tail. The swimmy tail is also very something I'm very fond of, because swimmy tail is exactly Alex's turn of phrase. This is he just texted me the phrase out of context. It has a swimmy tail as soon as he learned about this, like, you know, imminently before the paper was going to come out. It was very, very fun. I enjoyed it a lot. Yeah, I'm sorry?
Wait, Alex?
Yeah, you leaked it to me. I mean, I think Mateo showed you the figures and you were like, James, it has a swimmy tail.
That kicks ass.
It was very funny. I mean, it would have been like, I think this was your first year of grad school too. Like it was, you were next to information. You were like, I have to tell James immediately.
I got it.
And it was very, very kind of you to do so. There are two lines in the paper, I think, that might be like, I think are kind of saying what they say. So there's a line, it's from the second to last paragraph on page 3. It just it says, contrary to recent suggestions that Spinosaurus was confined to wading and the apprehension of prey from around the edges of bodies of water, the morphology and function of its tail, along with other adaptations for life in water, point to Spinosaurus having been an active and highly specialized aquatic predator that pursued and caught its prey in the water column. And so I think perhaps the line that's like really spurring the opposition is like pursued and caught, which I can understand a little bit. Like that does imply fast, but it doesn't mean that. And I mean, I don't think this animal not being a marlin or like a mako shark means that it can't be pursuing is a very loose term, right? If you've got, if there's a lungfish the size of a Volkswagen drifting by you and you like lunge after it, I think that's pursuit. But the other line is, and they say explicitly at the end in the next paragraph, although the unique postcranial adaptations of Spinosaurus point towards an extremely novel mode of locomotion with the Dinosauria, other Spinosaurids share a wide range of derived anatomical features that are consistent with a partially aquatic piscivorous mode of life. So, how aquatic are we saying this is? Are you an aquatic animal if you live most of your life in the water? I think yes. A crocodile is an aquatic animal to me. Like, I don't think that means you can't come out on land. I don't know if you'd prefer semi-aquatic. But they say the title of the paper is, again, tail-propelled aquatic locomotion. They're not saying that the animal has to live only in the water.
Yeah.
Right. They are not... They're not fully saying that this animal is like obligate aquatic, but even obligate aquatic would be like, I think they're including a newt in that. In the Fabry paper, they kind of zero in and define this term subaqueous foraging, which is, and this was something that was criticized in the response was like, what is a subaqueous forager? It feels like a term that's like kind of a term of convenience to group the animals you want it to group. But I think it is an important functional distinction to say, like, these are animals that are eating in the water, right? Not necessarily they spend
under
a lot of time in the water.
Specifically.
Right. Underwater, they are eating. And that is what they are finding this correlation of the really compact pachyostotic bone with. And
oh, sorry.
Well, what I was going to say is, like, I generally lean in the direction of the Fabry and Ibrahim interpretation. And I think my reason for that is like to kind of go off of what Alex and Dalton have said. The model-based papers are interesting, but are models that introduce a lot more assumptions. And so my personal feeling is that if you've got a direct signal from the bone that something is the case, but a 3D model that is based on a lot of extrapolation between specimens, which may not all be the same species, is telling you something different, I would generally trust the inference from only the bones. Right, and in this case, we have, in histological section, you see really, really dense bones in Spinosaurus. And you don't necessarily see them in other animals, right? And this is something that correlates really consistently with other subaqueous foragers, but not with terrestrial animals. I think that's a really compelling signal, right? The Spinosaurus model that the Serino-led team portrays is based on cross-scaling of the elements from the holotype and Spinosaurus B, I believe, and other referred material with the Neotype. And so they're cross-scaling a model. That alone is something that could be, misleading, especially if these are different taxa with different body proportions. Right? If you put, like, if you didn't have the lower half of a human and you had a gorilla fossil and you were trying to, like, cross-scale. I love the silent film playing out below me. I'm very sorry. you cross-scale them and you say, okay, well, we had this, we have these bones that overlap from the gorilla and the human, so we've cross-scaled them together and we've come up with our composite reconstruction of what we think a human looked like. You'd have a problem because there are different proportions between the species.
Speak for yourself.
And as of right now, this isn't something we can easily bound because we don't have more material yet. And if we have another complete Spinosaurus fossil that we can compare to all of these things and has a lot of overlap with all of the material that we ever had, we might be able to sort some of that out. I'm not saying they're definitely different species, but they might be, and that to me is a pretty substantial complication with the ability to model the anatomy, in addition to the kind of specific issues with the model that Alex has articulated.
That's something I think we talked about in the first video that we did, where we talked about that paper, because that came out not too long before our first video. And I remember being confused by the composite skeleton that they used, using all these specimens that may or may not actually belong to the same thing, and being concerned about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a major difficulty. And I mean, just to say, what is... Hold on, I'm trying to read a taxon name on this tree. Yeah, okay, so pachyostotic bone with this really, substantial increase toward increased bone density. As I'm reading this tree, I'm seeing this in seals, platypus, elephant, but that could be because they're very large, and it's also not that much. And also, there's been speculation about semi-aquatic, history within proboscideans with things like Moratherium. But I mean, in terms of substantial or increases in bone density, you get it a little bit in platypus, you get it a lot in seals, a lot in early whales. They have champsosaurs, plesiosaurs. Yeah, I'll just call all of those plesiosaurs. That's fine. Crocodilians, Spinosaurus and Baryonyx, and then penguins.
It's also...
There's nothing that's not a swimming animal that is displaying that.
I think it's also in marine iguanas, right?
Oh, I may have missed that in the... It's also possible it's not in this tree. Marine iguanas aren't on this tree, but I wouldn't be surprised at all.
Hold on, let me verify before I make a fool of myself.
Here's where I get to talk about a little bit of math for you, Dan, because Alex said we love math. Just briefly.
Here we go.
No, well, there are
James, the math one.
I know. Well, that's not what you say. There are probabilities going both ways, and I think this is a thing that many people fail to get. Is you can say, based on something, what is the probability that you are X, or the probability that you are not X, right? And so we can look at these we can look at these rates of correlation with essentially how many animals with pachyostotic bone are not subaqueous foragers. And I mean, looking at that tree, depending on what you consider pachyostotic, there are a few very large animals that you may say, okay, that's a really dense bone. We'd call that pachyostotic.
Okay, sorry, just to clarify, I looked something up. Studies have shown that the marine iguana generally have higher compactness values in their limb bones, but not their vertebra, in comparison to terrestrial squamate relatives, which so the sensu lato term of pachyostosis could not be said to be present in this group, though their limb bones are are technically denser.
I see. Okay. And so there's you may have some animals that are pachyostotic but are not semi-aquatic. But do you have, or rather subaqueous foragers, but do you have subaqueous foragers that are pachyostotic? Right? So there is a lot of if A, then B, but not necessarily if not B, then not A. Right? These are logical reasoning rules, right, you're contrapositive. So you can say, if I am this, then I am also this, but that does not mean that if I am not this, I am not also that. Right? There are, there are logical rules here about what you can establish. And so I think to a slight degree, this is a really good example where I would say very comfortable saying, There are some animals that don't swim after their food that have dense bones, although not as dense as the animals that swim get. But there are no animals that swim after their food that do not have dense bones. And I think that makes the bone compactness argument very strong. Personally, that it's very ability that this is not a swimming animal, considering that this trait is almost exclusively seen in swimming animals. And we have samples of other very large theropods that don't show the trait, so we know it's not just related to body size. Not even all Spinosaurids show it. What's interesting is that the swimmy tail is really only confidently known from Spinosaurus. You may say, hey, it's weird that none of the other Spinosaurs have that. Do we know that?
Well, wouldn't you know? Because most of the other Spinosaurs don't have tails.
It turns out that Baryonyx and Suchomimus are both a lot less complete than you might think. Suchomimus is definitely the most completely known Spinosaur. Neither of these have a real tail. In fact, Baryonyx only has 2 caudal chevrons, so the part that projects down below the tail, preserved at all. So that whole tail you see on that mount at the Natural History Museum in London, that's estimation. That's for the display, right? We don't know that it really has a tail like that. With Suchomimus, we have a few tail vertebrae and 2 with partial neural arches that I can see here, or at least 2 very terminal ones that have neural arches. One of them has more of a neural arch than the other. Wouldn't you know it? It's a long, thin rod. And so it's possible this whole sailbacked swimmy tail thing is a Spinosaur-wide feature, right? There's no actual evidence that we have that this is not a common trait to the group.
There's another data point here. Ichthyovenator has a couple tail vertebrae.
Right.
And wouldn't you know it, they have long, thin neural spines.
Right. And so Spinosaurus may be the first one where we have evidence for this at all, but it doesn't mean it's the only one. This kind of gets at something I thought was interesting, in retrospect now, dinosaurs movement. When I was a kid, I remember when books with dinosaurs with feathers came out. And there was this really weird period where the only dinosaurs depicted with feathers were the Chinese dinosaurs from the Yishan Formation.
Right.
So Microraptor and all of those would be given feathers, and we'd be like, wow, look, these dinosaurs had feathers. And then everything else was depicted scaly still. And, and I think that's a very kind of literal example of, well, we'll only show it if we have evidence for it. But if you don't have soft tissue preservation for everything else, that's that it wasn't feathers. That's no observation. And I think that's really what's happening here. And every piece of observation we get of Spinosaur tails, like Ichthyovenator, like Scott said, and Spinosaurus, Suchomimus, which is shown in the Fabry paper, there's a long gracile neural spine. It looks like they've all got a sail to some degree. Where we have evidence, that's what we're seeing. And it would be weird, also, for a sexually selected display structure to be that among members of a clade. Generally, these are things with an osteological form that varies, or they're very species specific that they're possessed, because a very species specific thing is what a display structure is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a signal of breed with me. And generally, you don't want every member of a clade having the same signal, because then you're going to get confused. And that's a situation where you don't want to get confused, exchanging your gametes with the right lucky other Spinosaurid. So even if they were colored very differently, it would just be kind of odd for the same skeletal structure to develop and then just be decorated differently. Usually these sails are pretty isolated occurrences within members of a clade, I think specifically for this reason. So I think it was a swimmer.
I mean, it's also just I'm having a thought. I could be wrong, but another reason that crazy display structures tend to be kind of one-offs or very different is because they're not advantageous in other ways. A big display board on your body is not helpful in any other situation. It can be, but I don't know, if it wasn't helping it do something functional, I'm agreeing basically. Is there has to be a functional component, or in my opinion, for it to be so widespread, if it really is in the whole clade, it has to have another purpose, because you don't see widespread display structures like that, like we just said, like that particular, Like, think about squamates. A couple of them do have sails, but it's certainly not all of them, and I don't think they're even related, the ones that do. Like, you know, like, Dalton could correct me if I'm wrong, but, like, I'm thinking, like, basilisk and Hydrosaurus, like, those aren't
not super closely
related,
no.
right?
I mean, they're iguanians,
like,
but that's about, they're not like
right,
sisters.
and it's not like all iguanians have a big sail tail, and it's not even that the majority of them do. Like, that's very odd. Or, like, I don't know. Like, or think about, like, birds with crazy feathers. Like, those tend to be very specific and very different and sometimes just kind of isolated because they're not advantageous for anything other than attracting a mate.
The only case where I'd say, like, a group of birds all do something similar, and there's a huge caveat here, are birds of paradise. But birds of paradise all have extremely unique display structures in the plumage on the males. So it is a clade that's all defined by having wacky display structures, but it's not that they all have same kinds of big feathers and they're differently colored. Like, I think the closest example to this, if they were display structures, would be like bovids with their horns. But the bovid horns are probably also at least a defensive structure a little bit, or used in combat. Like, they're probably doing multiple things. But each species has a completely unique growth form, right? So this is not that they all have the same kind of horn. They're all doing something different. Now, granted, we don't really have the data we need to say that all Spinosaurs have identical sail or tail sails. And so I guess it's possible that they all had a tendency to grow sails there, but they were all a little bit different. But, you know, it certainly seems to me like this is just... We have evidence of the bone compactness in Baryonyx and Spinosaurus. And we have potential evidence of widespread swimming biomechanical adaptation. Parsimonious observation is that they're using their anatomy like that. And we don't know exactly what that means. This is a unique group of animals, and we might not have a good modern analog for them.
Yeah. I just want to chime in and say that, like my crewmates, I tend to fall also on thinking that this animal was probably swimming and spending most of its time in the water. To what degree of activity that is, it varies, because I think there are valid points raised by the counter-arguing team of just like the general body shape of this does not, it's not a marlin, like we said, right? It's got some hiccups in terms of being able to swim fast, let's say. But I think that a slow moving, potentially bottom walking thing is not unreasonable. And that's where my read of the situation is as well. But I think it behooves us to say there are competent, intelligent people on both sides of this argument. And that it frustrates me a little bit too when I like see people like, oh, like why, like, oh, it's like a frivolous back and forth. It's silly. It's pointless. Like, not even like to say like it doesn't matter from like a, you know, is there a practical application to understanding what Spinosaurus' lifestyle is? No. Beyond, but is it useful to understand the depth and beauty of the history of life on Earth? Yes. It's enrichment to the human experience. But beyond there's no practical application of this, whatever, like I think this is a prominent scientific back and forth that's happening right now. And these happen from time to time in a lot of fields. And I don't think it's productive to kind of be on the sidelines of that and then go, oh, like, why can't they agree? Or like, oh, I think it's silly that they're debating this. I think both sides of this debate, and it is a debate, are coming at it in good faith with valid reasons for thinking the things that they do. I think, you know, we discussed some of the potential pitfalls in the model-based assumption that I also agree with. I think it's stacking perhaps too many assumptions. But like, let's be clear, right? The reason that they're trying to take this model-based approach because it is a valid way to investigate this, and it is a useful way to investigate, hey, can we understand how this whole organism would have behaved in a fluid medium? And like I said, we're pushing up against the limits of the data that we have, right? The model is built in a potentially chimeric way because that's all we can do. and like they're trying to faithfully depict this animal as we understand it, but it's known so sparsely that they're doing the best they can, but it isn't perfect. And as we find more material, and as we, I think, also grow to understand how certain properties of anatomy, like bone density, are distributed amongst modern organisms, and how that impacts the lifestyles and ecologies of modern animals, our picture of what Spinosaurus is and how it lived is only going to become more clear, right? The only direction we can go is getting more information. But because we've got like tantalizingly almost enough, it feels like. And then that's often the case in paleontology, is we just want that little bit more bit of information, that little bit extra detail to help us round out our picture of the past. We're working with what we have. And in doing so, some people have drawn one conclusion and some people have drawn another. And, you can look at the evidence yourself and you can decide what you're swayed by, what argument you're swayed by, what reasoning, what direct observations. But I think it's kind of foolish to either out of pocket dismiss one side of this debate or to just dismiss the debate entirely, right? Because there's a reason it's happening. There's a reason that people are interested in this. And there's a reason that, journals are publishing these papers going back and forth. And it's because there are mysteries here. It's a weird animal. And we're trying to figure out, how something like this that we've never seen before can live. And it's not easy.
Yeah.
And I think that is,
and I think that's a really, it's important to remember. And I think it's also, the one other thing I would say here is just like, I've seen a sentiment occasionally of like, I've got an idea. They should work together and then they won't be arguing anymore. And, scientists are people. I think there are probably strong feelings on multiple sides of this debate. I think there's probably reason, these are two very large collaborative teams, right? It's not like this is individual people against individual people. I mean, Matteo's paper on the bone density has how many authors? I mean, 4, 8, 13, 18 authors, right? This is a large team of people. Scientists are people. The goal is, to work with a group of people and test the hypotheses as you see fit. The one other thing I would say is just, and this is I think very pursuant to Dalton, like not saying kind of don't sit on the sidelines of the debate necessarily. The other thing is the most recent paper doesn't automatically get to be the right one. There is one thing that's true in this debate. Like these are mutually exclusive possibilities. So one side's right and one side's wrong. Presumably, right? Unless there's some incredibly weird compromise ecology going on. Just the fact that the paper was published the most recently does not make it like the consensus, which is an error I mostly see in like Wikipedia editing, where like I'll often see a theropod and it'll be the tree from the original description is replaced with like a more recent phylogenetic tree because that's like the new consensus. And it's like, not necessarily. Like sometimes papers come out and everybody reads them and says like, oh, that's bullshit. Okay. And ignores it. And that's not then the official default of what's correct at that moment. Just an important thing to understand when engaging with the literature.
Thoughtful.
What if we ranked it though?
Indeed.
Should we?
We don't do that.
I think we could do that.
We don't do that in this video.
We barely talked about like the Jurassic thing.
Well, there's just there's so much to talk about with Spinosaurus.
Say again, Dalton?
I said, well, there's so much to talk about with Spinosaurus that it's hard to then talk about the design. I mean, we probably should. Yeah. I guess we can when we rank it.
I think we should when we rank it, yeah.
I have things to say about the design specifically. And I say that in a way that like it sounds like I'm going to say bad things. Spoiler, I like this. It's very good. It's kind of become an iconic dinosaur for a damn good reason.
Mm-hmm. But would you like to talk about that here or in the species viewer? Just out of
I can do that in the species viewer.
All right. Well, then off to the viewer we go.
I like it a lot. I don't care that it's not accurate because, like we said, we kind of said earlier, like, first of all, this movie came out before the Neotype was found. So why would I take off my opinion for that? But also, as I've said many a time, I don't really care about accuracy so much with these things. It can help. But in this case, like, it's not hurting it because, like, it looks great. It's the only reason, it and the Pteranodon are the only reason I ever watched Jurassic Park 3, because I hate the rest of the movie. It is not for me. But like, the puppets collectively are very good in that movie. I like the little horns. I like the blue on the sail. I like the green eyes. Yeah, no, it kicks ass. It's an S. It's great. Like, for what it is and what it's meant to be, it's fine.
I like the design in the movie. I feel like there's something toy-like about the way it comes across in the game, and I'm not going to give it that ranking, I think, as a result. I'm not going to be too harsh. Like, it's a very iconic design. It's one that I certainly liked a lot when I was a kid. There's something about the oversized of the legs and the lack of size on the tail. Like, this animal doesn't look big. This model looks small somehow to me. And the Spinosaurus as depicted in the movie is enormous. And maybe that's something we didn't really talk about. This is a huge animal. Like, we're talking about, in linear dimensions, probably the longest known theropod. It may have been close to 60 feet long as an adult. That's depending on some cross-scaling
the National
stuff.
Geographic article says, bigger than T-Rex.
Right, as it always says whenever we're talking about Spinosaurus. It's an insane thing that it existed. I think it's the stumpy tail and big oversized legs and feet here that make it feel small, and it just does not have the magic that it did in the movie for me. And so I think I'm going to give this like a mid-A. It's not a movie with the information that they had at the time, but I don't think the model really captures that.
Mm-hmm. So, Amelia actually hit on something that I wanted to bring up on here, because I have a little bit of a pet theory about one of the interesting design choices that was made with Spinosaurus here. And that is its little lacrimal horns.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's really interesting that it has those, because my pet theory is that is a misinterpretation from a left lateral skeletal drawing of the crest.
They would never misinterpret that.
No. Of the modelers.
No. I'm joking. I'm just saying the modelers would never have misinterpreted something.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. So Spinosaurus did. I genuinely, I don't think we brought it up. Spinosaurus had, at least known from one of the snouts, I think. I don't know which piece actually has it. Has what seems to be a little like thin and relatively small midline crest right in the middle of its forehead, right where these lacrimal horns are on this guy, these little horns in front of the eye, where it just had this tiny little, it's almost, I find it kind of comical because it's like has a giant billboard on its back, and also give me another display structure just in case.
Right.
And
in case you didn't see that.
Yeah. It's goofy that it really feels like putting a spoiler on a spaceship. That it's like, why do you do this? This is not needed. But I would not be surprised if these little lacrimal horns are someone saw one of the folks who made the model or made the design of it, saw the skull and left lateral, saw this little like bump thing there, and was just like, oh, this has paired little horns in front of the eyes, like we see on Allosaurus, like we see on some Tyrannosaurs and stuff, and made that assumption and put it in the model instead of that, oh, this thing had a weird little midline crest.
Scott, I've thought the same thing for a long time as well. And it's notable that Baryonyx also has kind of a midline little poker. And I think at least some reconstructions of Suchomimus have that too.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think even if they hadn't necessarily seen Spinosaurus material that had a crest or the base of the crest on it, it's very possible that in using Baryonyx and Suchomimus as a base to help reconstruct it, they're like, oh, it probably had a horn, and did not realize that it wasn't paired horns.
Yes. I also, to get onto my actual ranking, I love this design. I love, specifically, I love these colors. This is the canon Spinosaurus coloration in my head. I've seen some gorgeous reconstructions of Spinosaurus, namely my second canon one, besides the Prehistoric Kingdom one, which is just what that animal actually looked like, is, y'all remember Todd Marshall's paleo art?
Oh, do I?
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. He had a couple Spinosaurus that were like this vintage of Spinosaurus that were just the damn coolest. There's one that kind of has like a yellowy sort of sail that just like really sticks out in my mind. Oh man, love his stuff. It's all gnarly and swampy and looks like it's covered in moss and has like holes in its sail and stuff, like it was living in the like it was living at the bottom of like a poison swamp for eons. And it's like this eldritch creature that's coming up to just snap something in half. Love it. Love it. And to kind of dovetail that into James's point of like, it doesn't feel big. I fully agree with that. And I do think that it is the oversized legs and the relatively shorter tail. That like, I remember specifically there's that one shot in JP3 where it's after they have the reunion where they're just like we hear the phone ringing, and then it cuts over and Spinosaurus is standing there at the tree line flexing apparently at them. Just kind of standing a little bit more upright. And that shot of just like, oh no, is so good. And it makes it feel so huge. But yeah, I like this design more or less. I always use it in my parks because like it's classic. It's when I think of this time of Spinosaurus, I think of this design more or less. Again, it's more the JP3 one. I really like that in this game they do lean into the fish eating. I like that they did pay attention to detail of it's kind of fishing with touch with the end of its snout, which like even if it was a fully or a really aquatic animal, again, fully aquatic, air quotes, whatever you want to put around that. Like crocodilians do this and they eat in the water column. That it's, if you've ever seen videos of people like stunt performers putting their heads in crocodile mouths and stuff. And moreover, if you've seen some of those that they go wrong and there's I
love those.
Yeah. Those are almost always from an excess strand of hair or a drip of sweat just boop right on the inside of the mouth and triggered that instantaneous just reaction. And I bet Spinosaurus would have had something similar, or Spinosaurids would have had reflexes and touch sensors that were similar to that. So I think that it's an entirely plausible way that this version of this dinosaur could be depicted eating. I love it. I love the sounds it makes. I love I wish it kind of did iconic sound a little bit more. It's like big roar that it did all the time.
Do you know why it doesn't?
Yeah, the fun fact.
What?
Go ahead, James. If you know.
Apparently, all of the sound files. Sorry, we're completely delayed. Apparently, all of the sound files were lost. The sound effects don't exist anymore.
Yeah. Dad, why don't we make Spinosaurus sounds the way we did in Jurassic Park 3? Son, we don't know how to.
I have a dumb question.
Yeah.
Why can't they just record the sounds it makes in the movie
I don't know.
and then
It'd be less good.
play it in the game? Yeah, but you're like starting with most
because
sound. But what is our source for that? They lost
because
files, and that's why it's like that.
this has been said apparently by people in the studio. But like what they were doing with this is like these weren't pre-made roars and everything. Like these are sounds they sampled and were mixing together. Like you know what I mean? This wasn't like each one's a specific. And so if they've lost the source stuff, they could never exactly recreate it. And it pains me to say this, it's perhaps one of the things you could do with AI is like have it retro compute what the source sounds were somehow. I'm sure this is something AI could do. This would not be something I'd be opposed to, saying like, here are some sound effects. Can we figure out what we need to sample to recreate them?
Sure.
It's less evil than a lot of other uses for sure.
Huh. I had no idea.
I see on Reddit
I didn't even know he was sick.
They were lost in a fire.
Is that what it was?
That's what I see on Reddit, so you know.
Ironic.
Well, if it's on Reddit,
It must be true.
it must be true.
It's the Spinosaurus curse. It has the call of the void. It must constantly be purged in fire. Do we know if the Brits set this fire?
I doubt it, but it's possible.
Maybe. But yeah, okay. This is a long-winded way of saying I think that this is an A. There's a couple things that they could tweak about it to make it an S, but overall, this is an A, a very solid A.
Cool. I am almost last, and so many of the things I would say have been said, and I agree. So my issue is that, like, aesthetic. This is a Stan Winston design, and as a Stan Winston design, it's very good, and I like it. I love the sail. I like the colors. I like its angry little face. It is like squinting a Spinosaurus. But here's my problem. As Matteo once said to me when I asked him why he likes Spinosaurus, he's like, "It is like a dragon," which it is. And it's just kind of why it's like the real Spinosaurus, whether it is, you know, let's say we are everything we talked about the whole video is totally wrong, and it's not like submerged most of the time. It's still very, like, even hanging out on the shoreline, it's still got a wild tail, stupid little legs, probably. Like, incredibly weird and cool looking animal. And if it's like bottom walking, like I'd like it to, it's even cooler. So the issue I come into is just that the actual animal seems to be like, oh no. No, it's a beautiful Stan Winston design. It's got pizzazz. Unfortunately, we live in the reality where the real animal is just like one of the coolest dinosaurs ever. And like, you know, everyone's like, everyone likes T-Rex, everyone likes Spinosaurus. And I am someone who, personally, I love the little guys. I'm a little guy enjoyer. I like the little theropods. I like the weirdos. Lunosaurus, #1 fan. But T-Rex is cool because it can, like, blow things up with its mouth. And Spinosaurus is cool because it's a giant monster that lived in a river. And the real Spinosaurus animal, by all the data we have, seems to be kind of more interesting in really every regard than this design is. You know, it's got the sail tail. Maybe it's swimmy. And so really no fault of this design being of its time. It's beautiful, but it is, I can't help but just get the canonical the definitely thing we know 100% about Spinosaurus out of my mind. Even like, you know, with all the inferences and stuff. So I would have to give this a high A. Man, that Prehistoric Planet one's pretty good. Or Prehistoric Kingdom.
It's so good.
This is our Prehistoric Kingdom review of Spinosaurus. It's really good. I would give it an S. An S+.
I'd give it every design in that game's an S. Oh my god. I like how the Prehistoric Kingdom one also is the one that does the most plausible version of the air quotes knuckle walking, and that like it has like a threat display where it'll like get down and hunch down and anchor itself on the ground and then roar, but then it'll walk around on two legs. I'm like,
no, it's
it's so cool.
my final said, everyone in our comments says you guys should do a prehistoric planet, or I've done it again, prehistoric kingdom reaction series, and I'm going to do that series for you right now. They're all great. They're all very good designs. Maybe some of them are a high A. I don't know. There's the series. I hope you enjoy. They're very good. I like to look at them.
Well, no, and now I enter the realm. Now I enter the zone of disappointment. Now I enter. Now I am become sad, crier of tears.
Why?
No, because no matter what I say, it's going to be an A tier when it deserves better.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I give this an S. I mean, Alex is right that the real Spinosaurus is incredibly cool and interesting, and it's an awesome animal, and I love it. And it became one of my favorite dinosaurs in 2001 when I saw this, and it remains one of my favorite dinosaurs forever because it's really, really cool. But this is an awesome design. It's got great colors. I find that it works for me. I'm not getting the toy. I sometimes agree with you, James, on like the toy-like quality. I'm not getting it as badly in this one, and maybe it's just because I had a ton of Spinosaurus toys, so like they're just like it blurs the lines between reality and fiction for me when this movie came out. It seems a little longer than it is in the movie, which kind of I enjoy visually, at least in the torso. Maybe I'm wrong. I do miss the sound effects, but like, I mean, this is Spinosaurus, Jurassic Parkified. Like this is. I mean, not really, but right because it doesn't look like the actual animal, but that doesn't matter because this is from 2001 when most people were still drawing the actual animal like an Allosaurus with a sail. This was a risky pull for them to do as the main antagonist dinosaur of Jurassic Park 3. And I think they succeeded at every level they could have, except they wound up just wrong about what it looked like because they took the most conservative approach, which I'm going to get on my soapbox for a moment. I say this a lot when people talk about things like Therizinosaurus and other charismatic but very poorly known taxa that we very commonly infer their life appearance from close relatives. And usually I point to Dinochirus when I say, hey, look at all the just giant gallimimuses that people drew before we figured out that Dinochirus was a strange and crazy animal. I direct your attention to this, an extraordinarily reasonable interpretation of what Spinosaurus was in 2001, given the evidence at hand. It was based in phylogenetics pilled. It was in accordance with all available evidence, and look how wrong it is. Just always keep that in mind. Please always keep that in mind. But also keep in mind that this is an S tier design, and it's going to get rated at A tier. And this is my beautiful Supreme Court dissent that we're all going to have to be so excited to read for the next 8,000 years.
That's beautiful, Dalton.
Oh my God.
Thank you.
Alrighty. Well, as Dalton bemoaned there, Spinosaurus goes in A tier.
Very good, I suppose.
Very nice. Yeah.
It's fine, you know?
Yeah.
I guess it can go there. So, is it that time?
It is time.
It is that time.
Are we going to spin the wheel? Wait, I'm sorry, I spoiled it.
Oh, oops.
Oh,
That.
Whammies, no whammies, no whammies, no whammies, no whammies, no whammies. Oh my goodness.
Oh my God.
Oh.
Finally.
Is that the last ornithischian on the list? I think it is.
Yeah. Wait.
It is.
Wow.
Yeah, it
Well, you
is.
heard it here, folks.
The last ornithischian.
Tomorrow.
The last one.
All right. We saved a wonderful one for
letters
last.
from Hogwarts ready. Because it's named.
Well,
I'm going to slam my face into a brick wall.
what I'm going to say is that maybe we should read out names of some of our patrons because we
should indeed.
have a bunch of them. And I am very happy that we do, because they allow us to keep doing the Skeleton Crew. And I like doing the Skeleton Crew. I'm happy that we do it, and I'm happy we have our patrons. And so the people we want to thank right now for their incredible generosity are insert nickname Benjamin Seepser, Philip Fico, Christopher Bellis-Jones, Aaron Anderson, Adam Molos, Blacklight Virus, Black Spectral Pig, Camphibia, Chaotic Kaiju, Dinodom, Kevin Preem, King Zashu, Life Finds a Way, Ryan Wants to Die, The Wigster, Touch Connors, Wanderer, and Wheat. Thank you all so much. And Ryan, please, it's all right. You didn't even have to think about Tyrannosaur taxonomy last week. Anyway, thank you to all of our patrons for all you do. If you've made it to the end of the video, please remember that you can show your support of the Skeleton Crew best by liking, commenting, and subscribing, and telling us that you did those things. Last time that I was on a recording, I said, just leave the word like. This time, I want you to both comment a comment that says like and comment a comment that says comment.
It's double the comments.
Yeah, double the comments. The comment per comment ratio is going out of control. So thank you all for watching, and we will see you next time when we chat about a pachycephalosaur that may or may not exist.
Yippee!
Yay!
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.